Okay, welcome everyone. Dr. Anthony Criniti IV here, also known as Dr. Finance. Welcome to the Dr. Finance Live podcast. We have an unbelievably special guest today. We have Michael Lechter here. Michael Lechter is one of the world's top intellectual property attorneys, also the husband of Sharon Lechter, my mentor. So I am really excited about talking to Michael today and getting to know him a little bit better. So let's give a nice warm welcome for Michael Lechter. Welcome, Mike. How are you?
I'm doing great. Good morning, Tony. How are you?
I'm very well, sir. It's very, as they say on the show, it's sunny in Philadelphia.
Sunny in Phoenix, too.
Sunny in Phoenix, too, yeah. And 2 more months from now, it might be different, but for right now, it is sunny. Well, all right. Well, thank you, Michael. I'd like to, welcome you here and definitely want to learn a little bit about you. So you want to tell us a little about yourself?
Well, once upon a time, I was a kid. Started out in electrical engineering, then ended up going to law school. I've, over the years, built the intellectual property sections of the big international mega firms, represented clients everywhere from cities to sports teams, from startups to venture capitalists to Fortune 100 companies. These days, I primarily do work with my wife, helping build businesses, making them scalable and saleable.
That's awesome, Mike. So just trying to understand, let's go back, I guess, chronologically. Were you originally from Arizona, where you have your ranch now?
I was originally from Washington, D.C.
Oh, no kidding. Wow.
I grew up there. Yeah. Spent a little time in Princeton, and then came back to DC for a while, and then went up to Wisconsin for a while, and then we've been in Arizona since 1991.
Wow. I went to GW in DC. I don't think I told
Actually, so did I.
You went to GW?
I did.
Wow.
I went there for my law degree, and then ultimately transferred up to Seton Hall.
That is awesome. Wow, yeah. So, and GW Law School is one of the top in the country, so that's really good.
Yes.
All right. Well,
and
thank you, Michael.
Back then, it was the Center for Intellectual Property. I'm not sure that's still the case, but.
Oh, it was the top for IP, yeah?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yep.
So what? Okay, so then you moved to. Did you move to Florida at all? Because I know that Sharon was in Florida or something.
My wife was from Florida. Okay. Sharon was from down there, and I took the bar and was licensed. Some of the firms I was with had offices down throughout Florida. Anyway, so I mean, basically, I built forts and fought pirates.
Yeah, I like that expression.
Yeah, well,
what does that mean? I have heard you say that in a couple interviews. I'm not sure what that means.
Well, that's actually what I do. When the kids were growing up and they'd ask me what I do, it was a whole lot easier to say build forts and fight pirates than intellectual property attorney. But if you think about it, what I do is build a fort using legal mechanisms around your intellectual property and fight off the pirates that are trying to appropriate it.
Mm. Yeah, that's a great analogy, a great way to simplify it.
It's a great suggestive trademark for legal services, and it's actually my registered mark.
Oh, you registered it? Wow.
Yeah, not that I'm using it all that much anymore, but it's kind of catchy.
Oh, it's definitely catchy. Very cool. We're going to talk about a lot of intellectual property stuff in just a bit, because I know you're the best to ask those questions to. But first, just trying to get to know you a little bit more. So why did you decide to become an attorney, though? Like, what made you want to cross that path and focus your whole life on it?
I got my initial engineering degree back in 1971. And at that time, there wasn't a whole lot by way of jobs available. And so I continued in school and had an assistantship and couldn't handle some of the politics. I told people to pass when they weren't doing the work. And so I quit and went to work doing investigation for a law firm. And then enrolled in law school, and that was it.
Then you fell in love with it.
I did. I mean, it's kind of neat. I mean, you get to see unbelievable just breakthrough things. I worked on some of the original CT scanners. I worked on some of the original MRI. Back then it was called NMR, nuclear resonance imaging, but people got scared of the nuclear. And the joke was that the radiologists thought that NMR meant no more radiologists. So changed to MRI.
That's funny. So yeah, law is definitely a very interesting perspective. I think a lot of lawyers, though, they get focused on making the money. They forget about the passion. You actually are extremely passionate about it. And looking at your resume, I mean, it's just, you always try to raise the bar. You learn one thing, you go to the next, building off the same core model. But that's how you became. I'm assuming that's how you became as great as you have in that field.
I didn't focus specifically in one niche, legal niche. Intellectual property technology, yes, that was my concentration, but I was litigating, I was doing contract work, strategy work. And I think the most fun, where I got the most enjoyment, was working with startups and helping them go from nothing and putting strategies in place. One, to protect their intellectual property, and two, to leverage it and really build a sustainable model.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I like how you said that, you tried different, you kept expanding from where you were, which is,
working in one area builds you in another. Litigating cases shows you the problems with documents. So when you're drafting the documents, you know what you don't want to do and what you need to do. And sometimes there is magic language that you have to get into those documents.
Absolutely, Mike. So Mike, you actually you wind up writing some books too. Can you tell us about the books that you wrote, their names, and maybe a quick summary of each one?
Way back when, I wrote a book called Protecting Your Number One Asset. It was part of the Rich Dad Advisor series. Before that, I wrote a book called The Intellectual Property Handbook. I edited Successful Patents and Patenting for Engineers for the IEEE. Kind of losing track of some of them. There have been a bunch of them.
I saw another one,
OPM, Other People's Money. My latest is a textbook called Technology Entrepreneurship that I wrote with Tom Dunning and Bill Hisrich. These are professors out of Thunderbird and right now University of Colorado.
That's your newest book?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I am in the process of doing an updated version of the number one asset. Probably call it a different name, but basically the intellectual property book.
Okay, and yeah, we're going to talk about that book, well, the concept of that in a little bit, because that's a very important discussion to have.
It is.
Right?
I mean, it's foundational for a successful business.
Thank you, Mike.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Mike. So let's go back a little bit. You had an instrumental role with Robert Kiyosaki and the Rich Dad Poor Dad organization. Can you tell us a little about your role with them and how that worked out?
I was, kind of behind the scenes, the attorney that helped put together the strategies and implement those strategies. The we had a licensing model. And at one point, I think there were probably 1,500 people around the world that were doing work to promote Rich Dad. I think they had like 15 employees. But the work was licensed into 80 odd countries, and I guess it was 80 odd languages in 100 and some countries. I've forgotten what the numbers are. But my wife and I came up with the strategy to do that. Rather than try to build things on our own, we basically used other publishers, other people's resources to get the books out.
Yeah, how did you get all, because I have a foreign rights agent as well, and I actually got a book coming out in Korea pretty soon. How did you get so many? Do you need to get a foreign right agent for each country, or can you find like just the top one that knows them all and you just get it done?
Most of the time we work directly with publishers. We do research, we find out who the strongest publisher was in the business book genre, and we would go to them directly. We found that some of the agents, not all, but the ones that we ran into back then, were a little bit too industry centric. They had blinders on. Their position was that there were certain ways you had to do things, and these were the experts. We started out listening to them. Well, some of the things that we were being told that we couldn't do, we wanted to do. And as Sharon is wont to say, why not? So basically, we got rid of the agents and started doing the licensing directly. First thing we did was unbundle the rights and the copyright when we were dealing with the US publisher. The standard in the industry at that time was that the publisher would take all the rights and the copyright, including the subsidiary rights, the rights to movies, the rights to merchandising, the rights, foreign translation rights. And the fact of the matter was they didn't have any real experience, the personal experience, any expertise in those areas. They were just sub-licensing things out. And then they would take a significant chunk of the royalties. Well, it didn't make sense. So we unbundled the rights, just gave them the right to publish. And at that time, hard copy books. It would be different now. They would get electronic copies, sometimes Audible, if they've got that facility. And we retained all the other rights. Now, the other thing that we did that was very, very different at that time, and has since become the standard for the big name authors, is we did a profit sharing as opposed to straight royalty. Basically lined out all the expenses that were appropriately netted out and then split the profit over those expenses. So it was an effective joint venture. And at that time, there weren't any out there like that. But it did very, very well for Rich Dad.
That's really interesting concept. I'm just trying to figure out how, the details of what you said, because there's a lot to that.
Say again?
There's a lot to that. That's pretty cool. I like how you did that. That's very interesting.
Well, just think in terms of best of breed. You want to go to the strongest player with respect to a particular right.
Yeah.
And this is part of the strategy that you put in place. You look for ways that you can take your intellectual property and identify specific channels. And or specific fields of use or territories. And you find the strongest player in that channel, in that field of use, in that territory, and you license them. And they're in effect, working for you.
Mm.
You
Yeah,
know,
it makes a
pure
lot of
money.
sense.
And you can do it in most cases if your strategy is right, without affecting your core business.
Mm-hmm. It makes a lot of sense. Thank you, Michael. So, go, so going back, the story with Robert Kiyosaki. Now, just to let you know, so being in the finance background with Sharon, that book has been a game changer. And I'll tell you this, coming as a professor for 10 plus years, I have continuously heard stories from students like, "What's your favorite books? Rich Dad, Poor Dad." I've heard that for as long as I've been a professor. Okay. So you have actually played a key role in making that conversation possible. Can you tell us a little bit about the story? Because just want to get it for the record, because so supposedly one day he shows up in your office and then you take him back to Sharon. You're like, "Hey, let's play a board game." Like,
you got it. At that time, I was with one of the mega firms, and I got a corner office, it's all walnut. In comes this guy, and he's wearing shorts and a sort of a Hawaiian shirt, flip flops. At that time, you didn't see that much. Today, another story. But anyway, so he comes in and he's got this roll of butcher paper, and he unrolled it on the desk, and it was the prototype for the cash flow game. And he wanted to know how to protect it. So we got that in motion, and he needed some business counsel, and so I immediately thought of Sharon and called her. And she thought it was really funny the way she was looking for a way to really take the financial literacy market, and we had an issue with our oldest son. He went to ASU, and within a few months he was in credit card debt.
Jeez.
And so it was pretty disappointing. As Sharon says, he had a really fun first semester. But anyway, that kind of set her on a mission. Her mission was to teach financial literacy, particularly to kids. And this game was a fantastic vehicle for doing that. And so I called her. I said, "Hey, I got a guy here that's got what you've been looking for." And that when she says it, it's pretty funny. I didn't really think about how that could be taken, but that was kind of the start. So she started counseling Robert on the business side of how to get this game out there, how to get it manufactured, how to produce it, and some sales strategies. One of those was to write some sort of an introductory pamphlet, is what they started. And that turned into Rich Dad, Poor Dad. I mean, it was really written as a promotional tool to sell the game, cash flow. And then it took on a life of its own. And they started doing a whole series of those books. And then to kind of fill in some of the details, they started a series of advisor books where they had people that were experts in particular areas do books under that. I did a couple of those. The Protecting Your Number One Asset was the first one, and then the initial edition of OPM.
Oh, they were the beginnings of the Rich Dad series.
Yeah.
Wow.
And then they had a fellow that was doing a lot of corporate and entity development work, do a book, some real estate people. So there was a whole series of them. I don't know, Robert and Sharon had a parting of the ways back in it was 2007, I think, somewhere. I lose track. But in any event, they went their ways, and I don't believe that he continued any of that. I took the rights back to to my books. So,
Oh, wow. So this, if I can recall, I haven't read it in a while, but in the intro or something like that, in Rich That Poor Dad, she tells the story, Sharon. Um, it's, it sounded like, what was the part about you brought the game home and you tried it one night, you
oh,
had all the kids playing the game, and that's when you knew it was going to be a hit.
yeah, there was he had when we first actually got Sharon introduced to the game, we were doing a beta test, Robert was, and as it happened, Sharon was the only one that was able to get out of the rat race. And that's when she really started appreciating how valuable a tool this game was.
Mm.
You know, and then she actually developed a version for small kids. We got patents on that. So if you look up Sharon Lechter patents, there should be one.
What's the name of the game? What's the game's name?
Well, the original was Cash Flow for Kids. Now she's since done a new game called Thrive Time.
Thrive Time.
That's really for teens as opposed to the little ones. Okay. And that's been hugely successful. And they were having contests among the high school students here in Arizona.
Wow.
And
over that game.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, that is a really, I'm a big game guy. I actually, I was thinking about the other day, some of my skill sets happened early on in life playing Monopoly. And I don't know if you noticed, Mike, but I found this out very recently and I bought it. The original Monopoly, you know what it was called? It's called Finance. I think it was just Finance, something like Finance. And I have it downstairs, but it had the name Finance in it. Before Monopoly.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. It's such a classic. It was like a 1932 or 35, don't quote me on that edition. And it had something to do with the beginning part of the history before, because they didn't, Fortune and Finance, I think that's called, Fortune and Finance. And they didn't know, they didn't know what Monopoly, that the guy who had Monopoly was going to actually sign the papers. So they took this as a hedge. They bought that company as a hedge, just in case. And if Monopoly didn't go through, they were going to use that name. So history has a funny way of working its way out.
That's cool. Well, the games provide situational learning, and it puts things into perspective, particularly for the kids. It's fun to watch the kids playing Thrive Time. I mean, my grandson is really into it. Or
you guys still play it? Yeah.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yep.
All right. Well, thanks, Mike. All right. So let's have a little fun question. You have a ranch. Yeah. So why do you love the lifestyle of being a cowboy so much? I mean, that's a really big jump to go from Washington. I didn't even know the Washington, D.C. part, but to go from there to this, that's a huge lifestyle jump. I noticed coming from the big city too, and I lived in D.C. 4 years. So.
Well, then you know that a big animal in D.C. is a rat.
Yeah.
No, it was funny when we found the ranch. We were just looking for a little getaway where I could go out and shoot my guns and not have people complaining about it. And the realtor that we were working with saw an ad in the paper for this ranch, and we went out and just absolutely fell in love with it. It was a little bit bigger than we were looking for, but that's okay. I mean, we fell in love with the terrain, just absolutely beautiful up there, and the history. This was a little piece of the Old West. It was kind of central to a huge range war that took place in Arizona back in the 1880s. It's called the Pleasant Valley War. I mean, it actually kept Arizona from becoming a state for about a decade.
Wow.
And all the plots that you see in the cowboy movies, the big corporate rancher bringing in the gunfighters to chase off the little guys, cattlemen versus sheep herders, all of that stuff came from the Pleasant Valley War. It started as a feud between two families, the Tewksburys and the Grahams. And Zane Grey actually wrote a novel that was based on this. It's called The Last Man or Last Man Standing, I forget which. But in any event, there were gunfights there on the ranch. We've got the Tewksbury Ranch. It's kind of funny. My general manager there lives on property that was homesteaded by the Grahams. So we've got kind of a friendly competition going. He's a Graham, Tewksbury. I'll tell you, they were tough hombres back then.
I haven't been to your ranch yet, but just by hearing it, the images that come to my mind is I'm a big Bonanza fan. So is that something along that lines, or?
We've got the rolling hills. We've got tall pines, high desert. Pretty much any terrain that you can think of. We've got about 43,000 acres of grazing.
That's a lot.
And for Arizona, that's a sizable range, particularly northern Arizona.
Mm-hmm.
We've got about 300 mother cows. So we've got a real honest to God cattle operation going. And then we've got a guest range side. We've got people that, at least before COVID, were coming from all around the world. And come and get to experience the cowboy life.
How big's your, I'm sorry.
No, you go ahead.
Yeah, how big is your guest resort? Like how many rooms and stuff like that?
We've got 9 bedrooms, 8 of which we make available for guests. If people are really friendly, we can set up bunks and get as many as 40 beds up.
Wow. Now
for bigger groups, we can bring in tents and things like that.
Yeah, and that's what I was thinking. That's a new style right now. They do that up in the Pocono Mountains where I'm at. They call it glamping, glamorous camping. And it actually seems pretty cool. I haven't done it yet, but it looks cool.
Yeah, we looked into that. The issue that you have when you set the glamping tents up on a permanent basis is the critters.
Mm.
They get in there and start chewing on mattresses, and we haven't quite figured out how to deal with that yet.
Yeah. I can imagine, yeah, especially like the smaller ones, like the bed bugs and stuff like that.
Yeah, well,
how would you fight that?
Actually the bugs you can spray for.
Oh, okay.
It's the rodents and the birds that get in there and start chewing on things, making a mess. But anyway,
yeah.
It's fun, and we've got so many different areas that we can set people up in if that's what they want to do. If they want to get away and have absolute privacy, we can set that up. It's really cool.
Yeah, absolutely, Mike. And as I was saying before we started this, I definitely want to get up there one day. That sounds like a really, really cool spot. So
I hear my tender invite.
Thank you, Mike. Appreciate it. I heard a lot. Eric Swanson told me a lot of good stuff too. So he was up there. He told me good things.
Yeah, that's we've got a rifle range, pistol, and shotgun, flamethrowers. At one point, we had a world-class sporting clay course, but we found that most of the guests weren't up to taking the whole course. It was 100 rounds of 12 gauge.
Wow.
And most people would get through the first couple of stations and they'd had enough. So we ended up taking that down and we're recasting it as a little easier shoot.
All right. All right. Thank you, Mike. Appreciate it. Okay. So Mike, we have, we're going to move into the intellectual property questions now. Would you rank intellectual property as the most valuable asset? Why or why not? And this ties into the title of your book too. So,
well, let me take a step back. Okay. For all things considered, patents are most definitely the most valuable, the strongest protection that you can get, because they're the only protection against independent development. If there's something on the market and it can be reverse engineered, and we're talking technology, mechanical, electrical, or composition, again, the only way that you can really protect that, if it's reverse engineerable, ascertainable from publicly available information, got to be a patent. But let's take a step back, if it's okay. Stop me if
No, go ahead. You're doing great, Mike. Thank you.
There's to be successful, a business really has to have certain essential elements. Okay, so it's got to have a mission. Most successful companies either are solving a problem or they're serving some sort of an identified need. They identify a need in a particular target market, and that's where the focus is. The mission is to solve that problem, fulfill that need. Okay. You got to have the right type of leadership, people that can identify that mission, identify the needs, and keep everybody on task. Then you need to have a team of people that have all the different skills that you need to run a company. And that's your advisors, your employees, people that you can leverage your expertise to. That kind of sets the boundaries. Then you need to have some certain foundational elements in place. You need to have the right type of legal foundation. Pick the right entity, have the right contracts in place. Make sure you own what you think you own. Do what you can to avoid liability to third parties and protect your intellectual property. Okay. Now, you can have the best product or service in the world, and it doesn't do you any good if you don't have the systems in place to make it, produce it, get it out to your customers, bill for it, collect the money, keep track of it. You got to have the right type of marketing. Having that super product doesn't do you a dang bit of good if nobody knows about it. And you got to create the right type of relationships within the company, with your customers, and with investors. On top of that, you got to, as a company grows, it's going to need certain resources. Now, one of those resources is money. Okay, but generally, that money is needed to get other resources. There are alternatives to that. Now, you need to make sure you've got the resources that you need available when you need them. That making sense?
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay, so you have to have that type of a foundation for a successful business. And then there's one more thing that you need, because all the successful businesses are going to have those things that I just talked about. You got to have a competitive advantage. There has to be something about your product or the way that you do things that attracts customers to you instead of going to your competition, or something that gives you better margins. So, that's the formula for being able to have a scalable business. Sometimes my mind.
No, take your time. You're doing great.
What do you think is going to happen when you have a competitive advantage? It starts making a difference in the marketplace. Competitors are going to pounce. They are going to adapt and adopt, which is a polite way of saying they're going to take your stuff. So you've got to do something to keep them from doing that. And that's where the intellectual property protection mechanisms come in. You've got a whole toolbox full of these protection mechanisms. And they're designed to protect different types of intellectual property and provide different types of protection. And you want to apply those to your business. Now, that's not, you can have a competitive advantage in any aspect of your business. It doesn't necessarily have to be in your deliverable, your service, or your product. It could be in the business systems that you put in place. That's what Amazon is all about. They came up with in essence, a fulfillment system
Mhm.
That's what Uber's all about. It's all in systems. Now, the systems are really the tool that lets you scale. I mean, if you've got special expertise and you're applying it, if you're the only one that can apply it, there's only so big your business is going to get. So you've got to come up with a way to leverage that expertise. Let other people that you employ or have a contractual relationship with use that expertise. And you have to be able to control the quality of their work. That's how you scale. Okay, so we were talking, patents are one of those legal protection mechanisms that I was talking about. There's also trade secrets, trademarks, copyrights, mask works. Mask works relate to semiconductor layouts, the layouts of semiconductor chips. And quite frankly, that you don't see that used very much anymore because the technology kind of bypassed that form of protection. But you can start out by keeping something secret. Now, how do you leverage something that you keep secret? I mean, how can you let other people use it without giving away the secret?
Mm-hmm.
That's where the law of contracts comes in and licensing. Okay, that's where you make sure that anybody that has access to that secret is under a contractual obligation to keep it secret.
With an NDA or something like that, right?
That's the NDA,
Mm-hmm.
or you have a provision in another license. But basically, it's creating an obligation to keep the secret. Now, to have a trade secret right that's enforceable against third parties, you got to treat the information like it's a secret.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't, you can be pretty well assured that the courts won't enforce rights against others. So what does that mean? It means you got to restrict access to it and have those written confidentiality agreements with everybody that has access to the information.
Would that mean, let's say you're dealing with a person who's got 30 employees, you get the NDA from that person. Do you have to get an NDA from everybody that works for them? And how would you even do that if that's true? Because you don't know all the 30 employees.
It depends. I mean, you can. Generally, what you would do is you would have the NDA, the obligation would be on the company, and you would make it the company's responsibility to make sure that anybody that got access to it through them, subject to the agreement, that they agreed to maintain the secret.
Yeah, basically, you would say such and such person and their such and such company that they own and all their employees.
And I mean, you would specifically say that they would restrict it to the employees that needed it to do the job, and that they would agree to be subject to the provisions of the agreement. In some cases, you would have them give you the identities of those employees. It depends on just how serious you are about keeping something secret.
Thank you, Mike. So, Mike, just going back to the original question, if you can just summarize it, would you rank intellectual property as the most valuable asset? Now, when I'm talking about most valuable asset, like on a balance sheet, you got your assets minus your liabilities, net worth, like you have current assets, all that stuff, cash. Would you put intellectual property up there?
In a word, yes. 40 years ago, about 80% of the value of the S&P 500 companies was intangible assets, brick and mortar. Today, 85% or better of the worth of the S&P 500 is intangible assets, intellectual property, 85% plus. So yeah, IP is certainly a component. And the same is true around the world.
That is a crazy
statistic. Indexes show the same thing.
That statistic is crazy. And we could probably talk more about this for hours, but just the first thing that came to my mind was when these investors are investing in companies and they're looking at, oh, here's the earnings for the quarter. And if they're smart, they're actually looking at the balance sheet. They still wouldn't have all the information because it's just a little section that says goodwill or whatever, but who's valuing that? Like it's totally subjective, a lot of that.
It is subjective, and it's tough to put a value on it. But a lot really relates to the credibility of the parties that are putting the information out.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Mike. That was a great response. All right, Mike. So maybe we got a few more questions. Let's figure about 1 to 2 minutes each. Why do you need to protect your intellectual property? Now, I know you already sort of hinted on this, but if you can just summarize that, just to have a complete response. So why do you need to protect your intellectual?
Let me start with a story.
Okay.
Back in early 1980s, there were a couple of guys out in Boston that came up with a blockbuster idea, an electronic spreadsheet. Okay. And I will tell you that this product in itself made the age of the PC, because it made personal computers relevant to people other than just us geeks. Before that, engineers used them, but the general public really had no use for them. This product made them relevant. And everybody's heard of Excel, right? Okay, well, I'm not talking about Excel. Lotus 1, 2, 3. Heard about that? Yeah, I'm not talking about that either. The product was VisiCalc, and it was created by a couple of guys, Dan Bricklin, and I think a guy named Franklin. And I don't remember their names, but I saw Bricklin interviewed at one point, and the moderator said, "Well, you think it made a difference that you didn't get a patent on VisiCalc?" And you could just see the look on his face.
He was melting.
He leaned back and said, "Yeah, only several hundreds of millions of dollars." And that's the fact. They could have gotten a patent on it back then. And they actually looked at it, and the guy they went to told, they basically decided it was too expensive. So sometimes, you don't really look at how expensive it is to protect. You look at what it's going to cost you if you don't protect. Because if it's out there on the marketplace and it can be reverse engineered from publicly available information, and let's face it, you've got to give a certain amount of information in order to market it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, sometimes you can use a licensing program system. You get a license from all your users. Now, today, it's not so tough to do that. Back then, you had to get a written signature to be absolutely sure that you had an agreement, because we're talking about agreements, and they got to comply with the law on formation of contracts.
Mm-hmm.
So they went through all sorts of gyrations to get those contracts. You have to have an affirmative acceptance. So they would put a contract on the box, and they'd say, if you open the box, you agree to the terms, that sort of thing. Today, that when you download a program, you've got an agreement somewhere on the web that you're supposed to get access to. The efficacy of those contracts really are a function of just how available those terms are before they press the button to complete the transaction. But anyway, long story short, if you don't protect, you're giving it away.
Yeah. And it ties into the previous question, because that's why it's the number one asset to protect, right? If you don't protect it, what good is cash? What good is real estate? What good is all that stuff? It all goes bye-bye. Like as soon as
if they can take it away from you, poof. And if you're thinking about selling a business, one of the first things that a sophisticated investor is going to look at is whether you've got that foundation in place, whether you've protected the intellectual property. Because the exclusive rights to that intellectual property tends to be the primary thing that they're buying.
Mike, I just had a thought. Like, I know you're an attorney, but I was a financial advisor before I became a finance professor. If someone accepts the argument that you just displayed here, that intellectual property is the number one asset, it can really, it's not too far of an extension to say that you're really like a financial manager, because like you're not that you're managing people's assets, but you're helping them to or a financial consultant, really. Like I know we have different definitions of it, with
Yeah,
securities laws, but you're essentially helping someone manage their number one asset, just like a real estate guy would help someone manage their real estate portfolio, or a mutual fund portfolio manager would help someone manage their mutual fund. You're managing one of the biggest assets. If you buy into that argument, I'm just saying, it's just, you're really at an intersection between law and finance.
it's a fact. I mean, and I've done a lot of strategy on that. I mean, you've got to have to be successful. You got to have a plan, and that plan has got to involve the development of your product and your deliverable. It's got to deal with your capital needs. It's got to and the other resources that you're going to need, and you've got a timeline. You need to know when you're going to need these resources, and sometimes you want to have not only a marketing plan, the development plan, you also want to have a capital plan to figure out when it makes sense to go out for a cash infusion. Mm. Now, I am a large proponent of cash alternatives. You can use intellectual property as basically a trading card. You can do it through licensing to get access to certain types of resources. You can trade a license for dollars. Sometimes you cross license to get to be able to use somebody else's intellectual property. Or when you're creating a business, if you think about it, each of the people, the co-venturers, is making some sort of a contribution to the business. And in return for that, they're getting some consideration. Typically, people think in terms of the contribution being money and the consideration being an equity interest. Okay, well, the contribution doesn't have to be money. It could be an exclusive right, intellectual property. So if your contribution to the business is intellectual property, the other guy's providing the capital, mm-hmm. and they get a piece of the business, you get a piece of the business for giving it or licensing it the intellectual property. Okay, so basically, you got a business. You own a piece of that business, typically the majority, and you haven't put a dime in. Mm. Now you're going to need money for employees and that sort of thing. Although sometimes they can get some sort of a profits interest. I don't mean that necessarily in the tax sense, where they would get they work on a commission basis. There are ways that you can do it without having to make cash outlays.
Thank you, Mike. Appreciate it. All right, Mike, can you provide a quick summary of the different types of intellectual property, copyrights, trademarks, patents, kind of like an IP 101, maybe a minute or less?
Okay, so each type of intellectual property protection is designed to protect a different type of intellectual property asset. Patents are designed to protect invention. The way things work, functional things. Now, I didn't mention it before, but there's also a design patent that's intended to protect the way things look, aesthetic features, ornamental features of a product. And these design patents can be very, very valuable. They don't have a wide breadth of protection, but they provide a very strong protection with respect to what they do. Okay, there's also plant patents that relate to living plants. I'm not going to get much into those. Okay, copyrights protect works of authorship, literary works, to some extent software, music, things like that. Okay, trade secrets. Trade secrets will protect anything that you can keep secret or make subject to a contractual obligation to keep the secret. It can be anything as long as you keep it secret, but you can't keep something, you can't really have enforceable trade secret rights on anything that's ascertainable from publicly available information. You put a product out, if it can be reverse engineered, it ain't a trade secret.
Mm-hmm. That's the discussion of NDAs, right?
I'm sorry?
That's NDAs when you're talking about trade secrets?
That's, the NDAs are really that's the contractual obligation that I was talking about. Now, trademarks protect your reputation.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of funny. Trademarks were the original consumer protection law. They were originally considered something that protected the public. The public, this was back in the days when metalworking and leatherworking were high technology. The public wanted to be able to look at a brand. They'd see a brand and they know it came from a particular craftsman, so they were able to assess the quality of the work. They could depend that it would have a certain level of quality because it came from that particular craftsman. Ultimately, the trademark became an intellectual property right of the craftsman. So the trademark prevents other people from trying to capitalize on your reputation, confusing the public, making them think that they're you or their product or your products, or that they're somehow associated or sponsored by you. Trademark rights prevent them from doing that. So they can't use any mark that's this confusingly similar to yours, that is likely to create confusion in the minds of the consumer based on the trademark.
Thank you. Okay, Mike.
Did you cover them? I think that was it.
Okay. Yeah, that's basically it, right? Copyrights, patents, trademarks, trade secrets. Copyrights, yeah. And an interesting thing I was reading when we were talking about earlier about the board games, right? Monopoly, I think, has something to do with that split. It was their game, like back in the 30s, early 30s, that led to the separation of patent because they had some kind of process, a trademark for their name, and then the copyright of the instruction manual, which is so interesting. And then you set up the first game for the Rich Dad Poor Dad. I mean, this like brings the whole discussion full circle.
Yeah. Now the law has changed now. It's much more difficult to get a patent on a game than it was back then.
Okay.
It literally changed the law to restrict what you could do with instructions for games. But yeah, it was a lot of fun.
Thank you, Mike. All right, Mike. So why are you interested in survival? We're going to move out of this a little bit. Just a little quick side note, maybe 2 minutes. This is the part that I think we got a lot in common with also.
Well, you take a look at the situation right now. You've got huge centers of population with no immediate resources. They don't have food sources. It's all trucked in. Okay, what happens if power goes out for more than a couple of weeks to the point where you can't get food in? The elevators don't work and they're living in these high rises. And people have kind of forgotten where food comes from. I remember my daughter being very surprised when I told her the hamburger came from a cow steer. But anyway, people have kind of lost touch with nature. And I'm afraid that if somehow the power goes out or there's an absolute shutdown on electronic devices, which is conceivable, I'm not saying it's going to happen, but it could. There's technology out there that could literally take out all the electronics. What are you going to do? So my thought was to have a place that would be proof to that. Now, we've got our own power source. And I have to confess that it is electronic. We've got inverters. And so, I mean, if there was an EMP pulse, it would wipe that out. And I haven't tried to do anything about that.
You don't have a giant Faraday cage around your whole building? I was thinking you would have something like that. Like,
well, I thought about it, haven't done it. But we've got all of it. We've got our own water. We've got our own food sources. So we could survive there at the ranch very, very comfortably.
Yeah, that's awesome, Mike. And you definitely brought up a great point. One of the quotes that I said in my last book, The Survival of the Richest, was, what are you going to do when the hero doesn't show up? Who's going to save you? Like you're your only hero that could be there in every moment, guaranteed, if you opt in to that choice.
Oh, you hit the nail on the head. Think about a first responder, if they're good, is typically on the average going to be about 10 minutes away. If taking an average over the country, some places it's more than that. Some places it might be somewhat less, but you're looking at that rule of thumb. Bad guys can do an awful lot of damage in 5 or 10 minutes.
Yeah. Especially, I always look at I love the story of the Donner Party. The funny thing about that story was the hero of the hero of the hero needed a hero. Like they needed like several heroes to come rescue them before they finally got out. They kept sending people out. If you read that story, and another person came to go save them, and this person didn't make it. It's like, well, I know that was 1846, but it can still happen in 2021.
And very, very easily. And frankly, we would be less prepared to deal with the hardships than people were back then. I mean, they don't teach survival skill sets.
Yeah, and we're going to lead into a conversation about finance in a bit, which is important to what we're talking about, because the way I write a lot of my books, my central theme is that finance and economics as well is an extension of survival. It's a very different way of thinking of it. And so they don't teach survival skills, and that's when they don't teach finance skills as much, it also ties right into the same conversation. So Mike, I want to just go into another question before we get into that. How do you build yourself into a deal without any money? So here we're talking about finance from a different perspective. Like you were mentioning earlier, and this is one of your titles of your books, I believe, Other People's Money. How do you build yourself up? Let's say I have no money. I'm starting out. I'm sitting on the street corner. I have an idea. I'm the next Michael Jackson. I want to be in. I want to get famous. So what do? I have no money. How do I build myself into a deal?
So let's assume a couple of things. One is that your idea is credible, that it makes sense, and you can communicate that, and people will believe you when you say it. Okay, so you can show them, in essence, supporting evidence. You've made projections, and you can make them believe those projections, and not just pie in the sky. Okay, now we were talking earlier about contributions to a venture. Think of the business as separate and apart from you. It's a different entity. Okay, mm-hmm. And you're going to take this idea, this intellectual property that you have, and you're going to contribute that to the venture. Now, that contribution can be in the form of an assignment where the venture now owns it, mm-hmm. or it can be that you give the venture a license. You just let them use it. You retain the title to the intellectual property. And whether or not you do that depends a lot on the situation and the objectives of the other people that are co-venturing with you. So you find somebody that has the resources that you need. Okay, now one of those resources is money, but let's look at other resources. So let's say that you need to have a studio of some sort to supply this. Now you can go out and rent one, okay, and then you'd have to raise money to do that. Or you work a deal with somebody that's got that facility.
Mm.
And basically you bring them into the venture. They become your co-venturer. So they make the contribution of the use of this facility. And in return for that, they get something. Let's say, for purposes of discussion, it's an equity ownership in the new venture. Doesn't have to be. It could be, a sort of a royalty on products. It could be, some sort of a percentage of any profits you make. You're only limited by your imagination and your ability to convince the other guy that it's a good deal. Mm-hmm. Okay, so now your business has a couple of assets. It's got the intellectual property and it's got the facility. Okay, so let's say that you are going to need somebody with a certain skill set. Now, again, you can raise the money and hire them. Or again, you trade them something for their services. Sometimes you trade them equity. You've heard the expression sweat equity. Mm-hmm. Okay, well, basically, working for a company, and instead of paying you dollars, they pay you equity units. Okay, so thus far you haven't put any money in, mm-hmm. but you've got the basics for the business. Okay, so now what you have there is worth a certain amount. So you go to somebody that's got money, assuming that you need the money. It may be that at this point you're in a position where you can start developing. And let's say that you do that. You develop a product, a deliverable. Okay, at this point, then you need to have a way to distribute it. Okay, and so here again, you look for a channel to do that. And you have to be able to get the product made and or you have to be able to provide the service, the performances or whatever that you're delivering as your product.
You got to be careful though. You might want to give up all your equity before you actually make money.
Yeah,
right?
well, and that's a very good point. The way that I was talking before about having a development plan and a capital plan, what you want to do is look for places where the valuation of your company hockey sticks. And there are certain things that you can identify that will cause a step up in the valuation of your company. Mm-hmm. Getting that product ready, or a prototype, or making your first sale, or getting a contract. I mean, there are a zillion, a plethora of different things that will cause a step up in the valuation. And it's all about valuation, because remember, what you're doing is trading equity for dollars when you're going out for capital. The more your equity is worth, the less you're going to have to give in order to get a dollar. So you want to time your capital raises with those steps in valuation. You raise just enough money so that you can get to that step up in your valuation. Okay, then you go out and you raise enough money to get to the next hockey stick point in valuation. Am I making sense?
Yeah, it's a process. If you take it in steps, right?
And it requires guts, and it requires a lot of work to figure out where these steps are and how much it's going to cost you, or what resources you need to get there. And again, think in terms of resources rather than dollars, because it may well be that you can get a resource through some sort of bartering or for equity, and it'll cost you a whole lot less in equity than it would be to raise the money and then go out and purchase access to that resource.
Yeah, it makes a lot
So
of sense.
it's just a change in mindset.
Thank you, Michael. That's brilliant. Okay, Mike. So the next question, principle 136 in the most important lessons in economics and finance. I said the history of money explains almost everything in history. And I expanded on this more in my last book, The Survival of the Richest. I heard you in an interview recently talking about a similar subject. That's why I wanted to bring this question up. Without money, can you describe what intellectual property law would look like? For example, would any of our inventions exist? For example, music, art. So one of the big arguments that I had in The Survival of the Richest was that how money is so important. Most of the things in history have to do with money, right? So, for example, a lot of our greatest musicians are scientists, et cetera. You're being the role that you have. I'm interested in your perspective because you're actually the gatekeeper for a lot of these people. So again, the question is, without money, can you describe what intellectual property law would look like?
Well,
Would it even exist?
here again, the whole thing really, I think in terms of wealth as opposed to money. And intellectual property and the protection of intellectual property is all about creating wealth, having that successful business. If there wasn't the money out there, the capital, so that you had outside investment, things would be a whole lot slower.
Yeah, I know. I'm sorry to interrupt you, Mike. I know that money is a part of wealth, so that's why I'm just focusing just on the money part. If money, the concept of money, which comes from the brain, actually. If that didn't even exist, if we didn't have money, whether it's rocks, stones, or paper dollar like we have, could any of this been possible?
Well, if it was possible, it would be on a much reduced scale. I think, frankly, if you think about the times before there was money, back when we're the steel and leather technology days, the primary way that they protected that was through trade secrets. Now, what that meant was that technology didn't advance. At any time, the only way that it would advance is if somebody was able to independently develop stuff. They would start from scratch. And so you didn't have the building blocks. The whole intent of the patent system and the copyright system is to get information out to the public so they can use it and build on it. A patent is basically a deal between the government and the inventor. Okay, the inventor teaches the public how to use their invention, and in return for that, it's to keep them from using it for a period of time. After that period of time expires, anybody can use it. And even during the term of the patent, the information is out there to improve on it. And the system is set up so that you can protect the improvements. It's really ingenious. But that would take an hour to get into.
Yeah. So in short, it would be very, like I think you were saying it could be possible. If it's possible, you said it would be on a reduced scale, right?
Yeah. And I mean, the money is currency.
Right.
You don't have currency, it's tough to trade, because then suddenly you have to deal in physical items, and they can be heavy.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you, Mike. Mike, I want to get a quick check on your time to make sure that you're okay, because I have a few more questions left.
Let's go for it.
Want to go for it? This is a great interview. I'm loving it so far. So
I'm having fun.
Okay. Thanks, Mike. All right. And these are all fun questions now. So the next question is, can one book change the world? So I'm a big, I'm actually a writer. I consider myself a writer before anything else. So books have changed my life, but you being also an author, can one book not just change a life, but change the world?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, think about Think and Grow Rich. The Rich Dad books. I mean, they really have changed. They changed the thought process of people, and sort of changed perspective, and have changed the world. I can't say that anything I wrote has done that, but I mean, those examples come right to mind.
You know, and Mike, you played such an instrumental role in this. That's why I'm loving this conversation right now. I get motivated to the answer you just gave. That's how I feel too. And you're correct. Like I've met so many people that have said the rich dad poor dad have changed them. Well, guess what? If you change the top leader, and the top leader is the one who's changing the laws of the world, you change the world, right? It's all a big
Yeah,
straight line connection piece of thought.
that's that leverage. Once you get it at the top, it works its way down.
Thank you, Mike. That's a brilliant answer. All right. What role has networking played in your life?
Oh, wow. Well, networking, I mean, I was in a service business, and the only way to get, particularly when I was really practicing, there were restrictions on the types of marketing and advertising that lawyers could do. And so I depended on networking. That was the primary source of business for me. You did a good job for somebody, they introduce you, they would refer you, you go to meetings, you meet people. It was, again, my primary source of business, the referrals and meeting people. Now, one of the best ways for young people to get experience is through networking and getting involved with charitable organizations. And you can get experience there that you wouldn't be able to get anywhere else. So you're doing good and getting experience and building that resume by working with charitable institutions. And to me, that's a form of networking, because you get to meet all of the folks that are involved, and they're typically high net worth and successful people that are involved with the charity.
That's a great point.
And so it's a venue, a mechanism for meeting these people and
So
showing them stuff that you never otherwise get.
Without networking, you wouldn't have become who you became.
Absolutely. No question about that.
Wow.
You get it on the head.
Thank you so much, Michael. And the next question is similar. We're talking about not only networking, getting to know the right people, but mentoring. Is mentoring important? Who are some of your mentors?
Wow. Well, years back, when I was a very young attorney, I was working with a fellow named Joe Lazar, who was very instrumental in developing the basics. He was a great, great teacher and mentor. I haven't seen him in probably, 40, 50 years, 40, 45 years. But, he was a great mentor. Another one was a fellow named Alan Kirkpatrick. Again, senior attorney at the firm that I was with. And then there's, my wife. We've kind of mentored each other as we've gone along. She's probably been the most influential for me, and then, my folks to some extent.
But mentoring is definitely important, would you say?
Oh yeah, yeah. You get the right type of mentor, and they have the experience. I'm not talking about a coach. I'm talking about somebody that can guide you.
A teacher.
Give you the benefit of their experience and provide counsel and bounce things off of you and vice versa. I think it's very, very important. This is part of the team that I was talking about. Mm-hmm. as a necessary element for a successful business. You got to have all of those skill sets. You don't necessarily have to have them as employees. I mean, these are your advisors.
Thank you, Michael. That's a great response. Okay. All right. So we're getting into the finance area now. So what are your favorite financial books? I asked a lot of people this question, but this is going to be a really great answer to hear from you. Everyone, by the way, always says rich dad, poor dad. So let me hear what you say.
To be perfectly frank, when matters financial, I go to my wife. So my favorite book is Sharon Lechter.
That's probably the best answer you can give. And I don't want to get you in trouble. So let's leave it at that, right? That's awesome. Thanks, Michael. Yeah, and she's got so many great books. I mean, Think and Grow Rich, we were talking about on Clubhouse on Friday night. She was really shining the stage. I didn't know that I knew it, but I didn't really look into it. The Think and Grow Rich for Woman was that's a really cool book. And I'm actually finishing up right now, 3 Feet from Gold, she wrote with Dr. Reed. That's a super cool book. I really like that one. So
Yep.
many.
Oh yeah, and frankly, some of her more recent stuff is really worth looking at. I mean, Rich Dad gets all of the fanfare, but some of her recent stuff is really good.
Yeah, truthfully, I do like the Napoleon Hill ones. They're probably my favorite.
Outwitting the Devil is, the people don't realize how much she was able to put things into context in that book. Anyway, great book.
Thanks, Mike. All right, and this is probably a no-brainer for you. Do we need money to survive?
Well, in this society, absolutely. Oh, now again, there are ways. I mean, I can see using money alternatives, going back to barter and things like that. But to the invention of money, of currency, was what let business scale. And being able to make sure that there's currency available has made America one of the strongest economies that was out there historically. Now, I'm going to reserve on present situation.
And Mike, I think you would appreciate this question because, as I was alluding to before, I connected finance to survival. In my last book, I put a list of all the survival essentials that you need. And I broke it down into mental survival needs and then physical, and then also a third category called survival tools. And up there with the axe and all these other things that, your top survival experts put on there, I put money in there, right? And actually, I listed as in modern civilization, the most important survival tool.
In the society we have right now, absolutely, you need to have that mechanism for currency. In a society that's broken down, it would be trading goods.
Yeah.
Money, in effect, currency would become ammunition or foodstuffs or some sort of tool that people need, and the ability to manufacture the tools, the trading goods.
Yeah, and small scale populations is not necessary. If we had a little family on an island, you don't need money. It's like, hey, little Johnny, go get me the apple on the tree, or Jane, go get the fish at the pond. We don't need money. We don't just bring it back here, right? But as population grows, that's when you need it.
Yeah, and I mean, currency is an absolute necessity to have a large, sophisticated society.
Thank you, Mike. All right, we're almost there. Just a few more questions. Is finance necessary for everyone? Why or why not?
I'm sorry, say again?
Is finance, so similar to the last question, but instead of money, is finance necessary?
Well, yeah. I mean, people have to realize what they've got and how to manage it. I mean, it's just that simple. They need to be able to plan. Don't spend money they don't have. Figure out how to bring the money in when they need it. Again, I think in terms of resources, and sometimes you can use capital alternatives, but you've got to have that plan. You've got to know how to handle money. I mean, Sharon is much more eloquent than I am on this.
No, that's a great response. And actually, my first book I wrote about 10 years ago was called The Necessity of Finance. Now, it seems common sense to us, but for the common person, it may not be so much common practice.
Yeah, I mean,
So,
what Sharon found is that a lot of people simply have not, they're not financially literate. They just don't know how to handle money. They don't know how to deal with checkbooks and charge accounts, the account part. I mean, as she says, kids will often see their folks using the credit cards, but they're not there when they're paying the bill. They lose a sense of what's really happening. I mean, they are spending money when they're using those cards. And I think that the fact that you don't see actual money changing hands as much anymore.
it's dangerous.
Pretty much everything's electronic, and the kids don't see the electrons.
That's a great point. Thank you, Mike. All right. How important is having a purpose in business, and what is your purpose?
Well, yeah, how important is having a purpose in business? I mean, that's the mission. Sometimes the mission is just to be able to exploit some skill that you have. I mean, I've seen businesses built around that, or exploiting a particular idea that someone has had. But generally, that idea was solving a problem. And I mean, that's really the mission. Again, the most successful businesses have a mission. Their mission is to solve some problem or serve some need. Now, sometimes that need is just something that's missing in the marketplace, a gap, so to speak.
And
But,
what is your purpose, Mike?
what's my purpose?
Mhm.
At this point, I'm really just, we got plenty of bucks. We're not worried about financial stuff. It's really just getting the word out, teaching, and I kind of like to learn how to be a cowboy.
Hey, that's a great goal, right? It sounds fun. Hopefully I can learn too. If you don't mind, I'm a city slicker, so that would be pretty funny, actually.
Oh, it's. I had never really ridden a horse before we bought the ranch. And I mean, it's the world takes on a very different perspective from horseback. Clears your mind.
Yeah, actually funny. You just reminded me. I did have horseback riding classes at GW for a semester one time. They had it on the menu. I'm like, hey, I get a credit for this? Okay. So it was pretty fun.
Where did they ride?
Yeah, they took us out to Virginia, and I had a friend. I didn't have a car, so she pretty much picked me up once a week for the whole semester. And I got to ride with a few other people as well sometimes. But we go out there in 2 hours, and I got to say, for 2 hours on that horse, I don't think I rode a horse before that. I came home the first night, my thighs were so heavy. I was so tired the whole day. I'm like, I was only sitting on a horse. How am I so tired? And then I learned, because the way your foot, your heel is pushed up the whole time. And you do that so long. It's like the Chinese, I do martial arts too. So the, excuse me, the horse stance, I guess that's where it came from, the horse stance, because the horse stance is a hard exercise to do.
Well, it's actually a great exercise. You sit there in a really deep horse stance and do dumbbell uprights. You can really feel it in your thighs.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Mike. Appreciate that. Yeah, but in short, yeah, it was a good time, and definitely looking forward to more.
Absolutely love it.
All right, so 2 more questions left, Mike, and then we'll close out. Maybe a minute or less. What would you like to accomplish in the next 10 years or so, and why?
Wow. I would really like to get the ranch, the Cherry Creek Lodge, to be a world-renowned getaway. I think that's really the only real goal that I have. Beyond that, it's just having fun. You know, we're pretty comfortable financially at this point, and
that sounds great, Mike. Well, in 10 years from now, I'm going to come back and we're going to see how many stars you have on that door.
you're on. Well, we're 5-star right now.
Oh,
But
you are? Wow.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's we've had, you know, fantastic guests, fantastic reviews.
That's great. Thank you, Michael.
Mhm.
You're really giving me motivation to go there.
Well, you're on.
All right, last question. What would you like to be your legacy to this world?
Oh, wow. You know, legacy kind of changes. You know, I've taught thousands of students at ASU. They're kind of carrying the flag, you know, teaching them about intellectual property and the importance of that to a business and that entrepreneurial spirit. I really think that entrepreneurship and getting technology that will take us out of having to mass manufacture and being able to manufacture on demand in relatively large numbers is going to make a huge difference to the economy and the society here. And if I can play a part in making that happen, that would be my legacy.
So you're talking about like 3D printing? Does that sound
Well, that
similar?
would be, yeah, I mean, that's kind of the beginning of it. But they're small batch manufacturing so that it can be done. And you've got the resources right there. And that's kind of the issue, getting the components, getting the resources to a lot of distributed places.
Yeah, it makes sense.
But it would bring our economy back, and we wouldn't be as vulnerable to external interference as we are right now. I mean, think about how difficult it is to get semiconductor chips, and that shouldn't be.
Yeah, I mean, I was supposed to get a new car, and they told me they only have 10 on the lot. I almost fell off my chair. I'm like, wait a minute, is there a problem with the shortage of materials? She said, no, you can get a tire. We got tons of those. She says, we just don't have the chip, and that's why they're not shipping cars over right now. I'm like, so you normally sell thousands of cars on your lot, and you only got 10, and they're already sold. So that's exactly the problem that you're hitting at from the automotive perspective.
Yeah,
But
you got a similar thing with computers. You know, it's tough. It's tough to get, you know, the higher end stuff right now because the chips are just not available. And in large part, that's because of we're relying on manufacture in places other than here, other than in the U.S. You know, and it's subject to political interference.
That's a great point, Mike. All right, Mike. Well, we're going to close out. So maybe a moment or two, if you want to tell us about where they can find more information about you or the lodge or anything you want to share. I give the floor to you for a minute or two. So go ahead, Mike. The floor is yours.
Well, anyone that wants an authentic cowboy experience and still be able to be comfortable should come to Cherry Creek Lodge, where the website is just www.cherrycreeklodge.com. And it is truly a little piece of heaven. In terms of products, the place to go is sharonlechter.com. And we've got a special on a couple of the products that we have, courses. And you can get 50% off on, and of course, I don't have it in front of me, on the Essential Elements course that we have. And I think it's playing big. And just use the code Dr. Finance and you can get that discount.
Sounds great. And yeah, Sharon has a lot of different products she offers folks. So she has her masterminds, I believe she just started really expanding on, and so many other things on Clubhouse. We're always promoting new things. So definitely follow Sharon on Clubhouse as well. And we're trying to get Michael on there. So,
do they have an Android version for that now?
They do. They actually came out with that last month. My recommendation, though, is to have a phone that if you're going to sign on it, don't sign on it with your phone that you use every day, because it's been compromised, and you're a survival guy, you know about that. So have a phone with no contacts in it and do it that way. That's probably the best way. Same if you're on Apple too. I say the same thing.
Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I nominated a few people to Clubhouse, and they had those same concerns. So that was my recommendation to them as well. And they've been advancing in their Clubhouse ways since then. So. All right. Well, thanks, Mike. Any last last thoughts before we close out?
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure. I've had a lot of fun talking to you.
Thank you, Michael. Yeah, and same here, Mike. I'm honored to have you here today. Really, like I think we connected a few years ago on LinkedIn. Same with Sharon around that time, but it wasn't until the past year or so that we came close, and I became a student with Sharon. So I've been waiting to meet you for a long time now. So I'm honored.
Well, hopefully I'll see you up at the ranch before too long.
Absolutely, sir. And if you ever come to Philly, like I said, invitation out there. I'll take you out, night on the town, the whole weekend, whatever.
I'll take you up on that.
Okay. I told Mark Victor Hansen, because he loves Ben Franklin. I give him a Ben Franklin tour. We got his cemetery here. We got his printing shop, everything.
Yeah, here's a little tidbit. I believe he and Crystal got engaged up at the ranch.
Is that right?
We were up there on for New Year's.
Wow. How about that? Actually, I heard from a lot of things happened at that ranch. The Secret was formed there, something like that, right?
Well,
wrote there or something.
The Secret?
Was it The Secret?
No. We've had lots of businesses formed around the table here at the house in Phoenix. And a lot of people got their start through conversations that happened.
That's probably, yeah, something through a conversation or something like that.
Oh yeah.
That's funny. All right. Well, thank you, Mike. All right. So we're going to close out, folks. I appreciate you listening here. This is Dr. Anthony Criniti IV, also known as Dr. Finance. You've been listening to the Dr. Finance Live podcast with Michael Lechter, one of the top intellectual property attorneys in the world. Also Sharon Lechter's husband, and he played an instrumental role in the Rich Dad Poor Dad organization. So thanks again. You can definitely get some more information. I'm going to be posting this podcast on my website, YouTube, and all the podcast directories. Let's see, this way. Okay. drfinance.info on the window here. That's the website. These are my books. I would always recommend start with The Necessity of Finance first. That was the first book. And then the Most Important Lessons in Economics book. And then my grand book, The Survival of the Richest, which is about this thick. It is definitely a book to give you nightmares if you're interested in that stuff. I always say take a dose at a time with those books, but that's my works. And thank you again, Michael, for being here, and thank you folks for listening, and I look forward to seeing you on the next episode. Don't forget to follow and subscribe, and go to Sharon Lechter's website and follow and subscribe Sharon on all social media platforms. We're everywhere. So thanks again, everyone. Signing out. Have a nice day.
Take care.